she likes it.
She's in the building. Here she comes. She's hands.
I hope we'll all have a chance to admire, Mr. President, during the meeting over the next 2 days, the newly hung portrait of Dorian Gray that right next to the clock.
He's got a law book in his hand. He never.
Yeah, what is that?
That's a prop.
I think he's wearing the same tie.
He told me it was the. Well, no.
Please.
I don't have to call the meeting together. I'll just recognize the chairman of the Education Committee, Regent Danae Davis.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
The Education Committee, with all regents invited, will please come to order. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Regent Davis?
Here.
Regent Spector?
Here.
Regent Crane? Here. Regent Keene? Here. Regent Loftus?
Here.
Regent Thomas?
Here.
Regent Bartel?
Here.
Regent Bradley?
Here.
Regent Burmaster? Here. Regent Conway-Kiesler?
Here.
Regent Falbo?
Here.
Regent McPike? Regent Pruitt?
Here.
Regent Rosenzweig? Regent Shields? Regent Smith?
Here.
Regent Walsh?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Good morning and welcome to the November meeting of the UW Systems Board of Regents. I am pleased to convene the first session of the day on charter school performance and UW-Milwaukee's role in chartering schools. Let me make a couple of remarks before I introduce our presenters. The topic of charter schools is one in which many of us have strong opinions. I believe, however, that we all share common ground in wanting to make educational opportunity and excellence available to all Wisconsin school children. I know I'm not alone in seeking guidance personally and professionally as a regent on what will best serve school children of Milwaukee and how we can best support UW-Milwaukee in fulfillment of its role as an authorizer of charter schools. And to that end, we will hear this morning from UW-Madison Professor John Whitty, a nationally renowned expert on charter school performance. We will also hear from UW-Milwaukee Provost Rita Chang and Alfonso Thurman, Dean of the School of Education. We've made quite a bit of material available to you, and that some of you will say is an understatement. Not only do our Regent materials contain a report from the UW-Milwaukee Office of Charter Schools with specific performance data from the 11 schools chartered by UW-Milwaukee, but you also have 2 additional reports in your Regent folders. They are the full text of Professor Whitty and colleagues' research report on Wisconsin's charter schools, entitled The Performance of Charter Schools in Wisconsin, and published in the Journal of Policy Analysis and Management this year in 2007, and an overview of UW-Milwaukee charter schools from the Department of Public Instruction's Policy and Budget Department, and dated November 8, 2007. This latter document was kindly prepared by Regent Burmaster's staff and sent to us late last week, and we're very much appreciative of the additional information. I determined that it would be of interest to all of us and asked that it be placed in your folders with copies made available to others who are present. Before introducing Professor Whitty, let me briefly remind you of the Board of Regents' role with regard to charter schools as set forth in state statutes. Our role is simple. We approve those schools that are authorized by either UW-Milwaukee or UW-Parkside. UW-Milwaukee was given statutory authority to administer public charter schools in 1997. No set number of charter schools to be authorized by UWM was established in the statutes. UW-Parkside, you will recall, received statutory authority to charter one and only one school in the Racine Unified School District in 2001. So while the board's statutory role may be focused narrowly on approval, it is clear that our approval comprises a more significant responsibility to the school children of southeastern Wisconsin served by charter schools authorized by our institutions. We want to be sure that the charter schools we approve are doing well, and hence the purpose of today's presentation, which makes available performance data on Wisconsin charter schools in general and those authorized by the UW-Milwaukee in particular. It is my fervent and personal hope that all of us will today have an open mind and an open ear to the information that we not only receive from our presenters, but also to our colleagues, each and every one of us, as we hopefully share in a rigorous and inviting way our own individual perspectives. And that may be shared in the way of questions that are asked, that may be shared in the way of comments that are offered. But I, for one, am committing that I am here with an open mind to hear from my colleagues, because I think in the end that will ensure that whatever perspectives or consensus that comes from us is truly representative of us. And so I do ask and invite each and every one of you to make that same commitment as I am. Let me introduce now Professor John Witte. Dr. Witte is Professor of Political Science and Public Affairs at UW-Madison. He served as director of the La Follette School for 3 years and is a faculty affiliate at the Institute for Research on Poverty. His research is focused on tax policy, politics, and education, including charter schools. His current work on charter schools is supported by the U.S. Department of Education and the Spencer Foundation. He is principal investigator for a research team studying the longitudinal effects of the Milwaukee School Voucher Program, and in 1990 he was named the state evaluator of the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program. Professor Witte is author or co-author of 6 books and more than 50 articles or book chapters. His most recent book, The Market Approach to Education, examines educational vouchers. Let me propose that we hold questions for Professor Witte until after we have heard from Provost Chang and Dean Thurman. Provost Chang will speak directly to the UW-Milwaukee Charter School performance data. Dean Thurman will address more generally the ways in which the institution's charter schools contribute to the School of Education leadership role in urban education, as well as the whole area of research and the research mission of UWM School of Education. We may need to adapt this plan because Professor Witte has a plane to catch later this morning and must leave by 11. So I'm asking that we hold if we can, but depending on how we go, we may feel free to ask questions of Professor Witte while we have him. Professor Witte?
Well, I'm pleased to be here. One thing I should say was not in the introduction that I'm most proud of is I'm an undergraduate from this university, 1964 and 1968, and I've been proud of that for 43 years. So. I never fail to acknowledge it to any audience. This is the old-fashioned way, folks. No PowerPoints, it'll get too complicated. I use them for all my classes, however, I've updated. But I want to do something very simple. I want to tell you what we did, what we found, and something about what I think happened to explain those results. Okay? This was a couple-year project. It involved about 3 or 4 components studying in the state of Wisconsin. The first thing we did 19 case studies throughout the state of Wisconsin, not just in Milwaukee. There are charter schools all over the state of Wisconsin, and they're centered in a number of cities that you might not expect ordinarily. Eau Claire, Appleton, St. Stevens Point, for example, all have large numbers of charter schools. We did 19 case studies. We also analyzed school-level test score data, aggregated at the school level. Difficult to get. It's coming out of the WKCE system and the No Child Left Behind data. It's based on sort of proficiency levels, and we developed a way to do that we think is going to be important nationally. We also analyzed 2 years of data, we analyzed 5 years of data in Milwaukee with student-level data. So we were able to look at student-level kids in the charter schools and not in charter schools in Milwaukee. So we have 2 types of test data being looked at, statewide and Milwaukee. We also were able to do 2 side projects on this, which I can't report on today. One was a teacher survey with teachers, which I can answer questions in the Q&A if there's time, where we surveyed teachers both in charter schools and non-charter schools throughout the state. That was actually supported by an anonymous donor from the Department of Letters and Science. We also were able to look at charter school laws throughout the country. We did an analysis. We published a paper on the laws across the states with charter schools, and I think they're quite revealing, in fact, that study. Now, what did we find in terms of the Wisconsin studies? Case studies. Well, we had a lot of fun doing case studies. They went from up to 3 days and up to 3 hours. I did a 3-hour one myself in a 2-room school north of Green Bay. It took me 3.5 hours. A fascinating school. It goes back almost 100 years, that school. Most of the schools we went to were larger than that, and we had research teams going in. First of all, charter schools are varied across the state and in the city of Milwaukee as well. They vary a lot in terms of what they do. If there's any kind of consistent modal group, it's probably at-risk charter schools, because that was actually built into the law favoring charter schools in the state of Wisconsin. But they cover every aspect that you can imagine. There are a number of Montessori charter schools, for example. Classical education with direct instruction. There are a number of engineering and science charter schools. There are a number of business charter schools, and there are a number of college prep academies. So it's not only charter schools at risk that are at the lower end, helping kids at the lower end in the achievement level, but also kids very much at the upper end as well in some cases. We found the motivations for these charter schools came across the board as well. Almost always, there was a single entrepreneur or set of entrepreneurs that started the schools or supported charter schools within the district. Okay, people like the late Tim Scullen, who just died, who was a great superintendent at Appleton, for example, was favorable in charter schools, and he was a leader in that area. Holly Hart up at Eau Claire was a staff person who was a charter school liaison person, and she worked very hard with groups of people within those districts to start charter schools. So and the third aspect is a competitive aspect. There is a competitive aspect going on in the state of Wisconsin. More than half of our school districts are in declining enrollment, and it's probably going to be 3/4 very quickly. There is competition for students out there, and it's serious competition. And this state allows that to occur, as do many other states. Another project we've got that we're reporting on, actually the plane I have to catch, is in 6 different states where this is also occurring. Using open enrollment, which allows kids to go across district lines and the money follows them, the state aid money follows them, and charter schools together, districts are competing for students. It's not only students in other districts. It's some very important students that we're looking at. Kids that have dropped out, bring them back into the school district under an at-risk charter school. Kids that are in private schools, bring them back even part-time. A wonderful story that I can go through up in Eau Claire, where the kids go part-time into the charter school because they can't get the type of instruction in Regents Catholic School that they can get in the charter schools. So they're using these schools to compete for students. Also, they're looking for students that are homeschoolers, to bring homeschoolers back into the system. And they can also come in part-time, and you get part of the aid for homeschoolers. There was a time, I think, in this state when homeschoolers were kind of considered to be a pain in the rear end for most school districts. Now they're looking on those kids as being a source of revenue and a source of filling their seats. Now, clearly also these case studies showed one thing, and that is that they increase the options for parents. There's no question about that. Not all parents go with charter schools, but they certainly increase the options that were out there in terms of the regular traditional schools. Now, on achievement, in general, the findings are positive. Unlike this New York Times article today in Ohio, our findings are clearly positive. In terms of the school level analysis, we had kids in 8th grade and 4th grade for 2 years. We had 4 different groups. 3 of those groups were very positive. 1 8th grade group was actually negative the first year in the 8th grade. We think we explained that pretty well by the fact that those were a lot of startup middle schools, and it's hard to start a middle school charter. The next year, those 8th grade kids were doing well. So we have 3 years out of 4 that are very positive. In Milwaukee, the results are positive as well over the years for the kids in the charter schools. We did not include the independent charter schools. We had some of the UW-M charter schools in the database, but not the independent charter schools run by the city of Milwaukee. They were not in the database. But the results were very positive. Several, just 2 points. Largest effects were for Hispanics and whites, but still positive for blacks. Okay. Also, math was the primary subject in which they excelled. I'm now on a study with RAND Corporation where we're doing the same type of analysis that we did in Milwaukee in a number of states around the country. In Chicago, for example, we're finding the same effect. Math seems to be, if charter schools are doing well, math seems to be something that they excel at. We're not exactly sure why. That's also true of voucher schools as well. So we think there's something going on. Finally, the last thing that we found was the grade structure. It turns out that the grade levels in Milwaukee that were most affected by charter schools were grades 5 through 8. Okay? 9th grade we didn't have data for 9th grade, 5 through 8, and then they fell off in 10th grade. Not so much in 3rd and 4th. In 3rd and 4th, they were about the same. We think what's happening is that a lot of charter schools bring kids in from the bottom up, and they need to socialize them into the system. So the first 2 grades are a little difficult. Then they take off. And the middle schools, they do very well. A number of charter schools in Milwaukee are large middle schools. And those are very good ones. An example would be Fritchie Middle School, that's where Bill Andrikopoulos began as principal, who's now the superintendent of Milwaukee. That was the first charter school in Milwaukee, Fritchie. Now, why is this occurring? And then I will close my mouth. One reason I think that's very clear is there are local initiatives here. I think that the fact that most of our school districts are chartered by districts is an advantage. If the districts get behind the charters, and they do, they support them. They can provide supports that it's hard for independent charters. Now, UWM can provide that kind of support as well. But in many places in the country right now, including this Ohio case that I just had, you have nonprofit organizations and other organizations authorizing schools. In Minnesota, for example, two organizations, the Pillsbury Foundation and Volunteers for America, have 30 and 40 schools that they authorize. They can't follow 30 and 40 schools. They can't provide the support for that, and they become, in Minnesota, independent districts. Here, if a district charters a school, it remains in the district. The district gets the state aid, okay? In Minnesota, if you charter a school as a district, which you can do, you lose the state aid. They become their own district within your district. So there's a disincentive. Now, the idea in Minnesota was to make these schools very independent. I think now in Minnesota they're looking to Wisconsin a bit for the plan of going back and making them district-authorized schools. So if a district authorized a school in Minnesota, my recommendation has been to them that district should keep control of that school in some way. The districts are usually let them be independent, operating independently, but they have authorizing control and they have accountability control. And they can provide services such as kids for disabilities easier than it can be done by other providers. The other thing I think that's extremely important is that there's an entrepreneurial spirit that I mentioned before that happens. There's a competitive spirit out there that works in some districts. The one problem that I see for Wisconsin, and this is the problem of authorizers again at this point, and it's something for maybe you to make some statement about, is that there are some districts, and there might be a number, that simply refuse to authorize charter schools even though there's people within the charter schools that have good plans to do charter schools. The question is should there be another route to authorizing? Right now, the only routes are statutory in terms of specifically detailing UWM or Racine or Parkside or the city of Milwaukee to authorize. Many states have state authorizing boards of some sort as an alternative or as an appeal. In other words, if you can't get a charter school started in your district because of maybe the board is against it, then you could appeal that to a state agency. That's something I think the legislature should probably think about. I want to emphasize that I am very strongly supportive of districts and local control in these areas because I think that's the way it works best. But I've also been approached by many people who said we just simply can't get anyone to approve an authorization within the district. Thank you.
See if we can't adjust this a little bit. Thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss the charter school program at UWM. As Regent Davis indicated, Dean Alfonso Thurman is with me today, as well as Professors Elizabeth Drame and Cindy Walker, and graduate student Nicole Traxel, who have been working in the charter school area at UWM for several years. UWM reviews its responsibility to authorize charter schools as part of a larger effort to improve education for children in the city of Milwaukee. Our organization is something that you are aware of from previous conversations. Bob Catman, our director, could not be here today because of surgery, and his office is staffed with an administrative specialist and a faculty consultant and graduate students, as I mentioned. But there is also an advisory committee, an application review committee, and an evaluation committee that is part of the overall monitoring process. We grant charters, establish clear expectations for performance, evaluate progress from a large amount of data that we gather, and take appropriate action to recommend renewal or non-renewal based on that performance. UWM has accepted this responsibility because of the flexibility that charter schools allow to develop innovative programs. An overall summary, we have 11 schools in operation. About 4,000 students were enrolled in the fall of '07. 59 students are enrolled in our smallest school, 1,000 students in our largest school. The school structures include one, K-4 to 2nd grade, 6 4th grade kindergarten to 8th grade, 1 4th grade to 12th grade, 1 6th to 12th, and then 2 high schools. Our purpose today is not to go into detail on any one school. You get this as part of the renewal process, but to provide broad, summarized data. 79% of the students in our charter schools are low income, with a range of 27.5% in the lowest percentage to almost 96.8% in the highest percentage. Our minority population, on average, is 94.5, again with a range of 57% to 100%. Our special ed enrollment is 10.8% on average, but again the range is wide from 5.4% in our lowest enrollment to 35.5% in the highest enrolled school. Student attendance as well is 90% for daily attendance, with a low attendance of 85% and a high of 97%. And I can explain the 85% attendance that is really driven by some policies and rules within the school requiring notes from parents, and if parental notes don't come in after 5 on excused absence, the children are viewed as truant. And again, the detail in each school will provide an explanation. Year-to-year retention is also ranged from 45 to 94%. Students entering our charter schools as a group, as Professor Witte mentioned, score well below MPS on the WKCE scores for both reading and math. Here you can see that no matter when they enter the charter schools, whether it's in a 4th grade or beyond, they are scoring lower than MPS students. Here's reading and in math. This is based on the data that we collect, and it's obvious that high-achieving students are not leaving MPS to enroll in UWM's authorized charter, and in fact the students are significantly less proficient upon entry. Student achievement is tracked by the Office of the Charter Schools using the WKCE administered by DPI. We also have adopted the measures of academic progress developed by the Northwest Evaluation Association and require annual parent, student, staff satisfaction survey. Perhaps the best way to measure progress is tracking the same students over time. This control cohort tracking is, I think, an important longitudinal aspect of answering the question of whether charter schools are performing. When we look at a control cohort of students who were 4th graders in 2004, now this is new and continuing students, we see that in the early grade, the reading scores for our UWM charters were below MPS. This same group then went on in 2005 to be in 5th grade and in 2006 to be in 6th grade, and you can see that the reading scores for students at the 6th grade level edged above the MPS line. This is, as Professor Witte indicated, this is much more pronounced for mathematics. Again, 4th graders, new and those continuing, were at or below MPS proficiency, and 2 years later were above. This same pattern can be seen for uncontrolled cohorts. This is new and continuing students, 4th grade, well below MPS proficiencies, no matter what year that we measure. Again, these are 4th graders in 2004, a different set of fourth graders in 2005, a different set yet in 2006. But by 8th grade, these students were performing above MPS proficiency. Mathematics, below. By 8th grade, above. We have variability within the schools. We track math and reading proficiencies on the WKCE for 4th grade and 8th graders in every school. The 2006 scores here by school for 4th grade reinforce that students at the early levels are not performing above MPS. We have Woodlands and the Milwaukee prep scoring above, but others well below. 8th grade reading, again, every school above. 4th grade math, again, most below. 8th grade math, above. We were asked to collapse a lot of data and not report each school separately, but the data is readily available. And it points out that the one school here on the chart that did not get above the MPS levels was the Milwaukee Academy of Science. It's the first time one of our schools did not meet the adequate yearly progress in the No Child Left Behind. And it's a school that has an improvement plan in place, new leadership, and external foundation support that has come in to help address those issues. We only have 2 schools that have 10th grade scores, and 2006 was the first year that these schools had 10th graders. The Milwaukee Academy of Science and Tenor, again, comparing to MPS, reading, and math. We will be tracking these 11th and 12th grade scores as well. I mentioned the map, administered through the Northwest Evaluation Association. 2006-07 is the first year that the schools are utilizing the map. We have limited and incomplete data, but the data is intended to guide instructional plans and align to the Wisconsin standards, and it's an additional assessment that we put in place over and above the DPI assessment. I'd like to finish by just reminding us that at the end of the 3rd year, we come back to each school in preparation for the renewal application. And that evaluation seeks to address 2 questions. Is the school an academic success, and is the school an effective, viable organization? The academic success is measured by 8 factors. The renewal documents that come before the board contain answers to these questions: whether the mission has been achieved, whether there's continual improvement, proficiency levels and academic growth, and whether the curriculum is aligned and clearly defined to the goals for learning, whether the leadership and student behavior and professional development are meeting our expectations. And to address the question of an effective, viable organization, we expect answers to questions such as effective governance, effective policies, student-parent satisfaction, legal requirement compliance, fiscal and internal control, and positive financial condition. In sum, our authorization is very demanding. It meets the standards of the National Association of Charter School Authorizers. It is an effective, comprehensive, and robust program, and overall, we have effective organizations and are achieving a level of success. I'd like to turn over to Dean Thurman now to talk about how chartering fits to our UWM urban mission and our research efforts.
Good morning.
Good morning.
As Professor Whitty, I'm a proud graduate of actually the University of Wisconsin system. I did my bachelor's degree at the University of Wisconsin La Crosse in English and my master's and doctorate here at Madison. And I have to wear my Badger gear and my Panther gear when I'm out and about, and I'm pleased to do that. But I wanted to talk with you this morning a little bit about the work that the School of Education does in Milwaukee and the surrounding areas. We have a long history of working closely with the city of Milwaukee and particularly the Milwaukee Public Schools. In the School of Education, we consider the charter schools to be part of our work. We don't consider it something separate, and we don't even consider it something special. It's just a part of the work that we do to make Milwaukee the best possible place for our children to learn and grow. We do a lot, I believe, at UWM to prepare teachers, administrators, and other support personnel to provide the best professional teaching skills possible to our community. The mission of the School of Education is to provide leadership and inspiration for learning and human development in urban communities. We take this mission very seriously, and I believe, as you will see, that there are many facets to the School of Education's work, and that we partner extensively across the city and region to accomplish our mission. I have a cold, so excuse me if my voice breaks a little bit in here. The Office of Charter Schools mission dovetails very closely to the work that we do, or the School of Education's mission, as theirs is to cooperate with community organizations, parent groups, educators, and other individuals who are committed to improving the quality of education for children in the city of Milwaukee to charter successful, innovative schools. Much of the work that we do support building innovative, successful schools across the city, not just the charter schools. And we help to establish clear performance objectives through criteria for learning targets for students and teachers at all grade levels. We've worked with the district in defining and exemplifying characteristics of high-performing urban classrooms, gathering assessment data at grade and school levels, and building feedback loops to inform teaching and learning, and building research bases to better evaluate teacher and school performance. Our charter schools are, in many ways, leading the way in these types of initiatives, along with some of the innovations through the Milwaukee Partnership Academy. I believe there have been presentations before about the Milwaukee Partnership Academy. It's an urban PK-16 council for quality teaching and learning. And the partnership is distinctive in its collaboration with the public schools, public and private post-secondary institutions, businesses, parents, and community organizations. The primary goal of the Milwaukee Partnership Academy, the MPA, is to have each child on grade level in reading, writing, and mathematics. Other goals include the improvement of teacher quality, increasing student achievement at all educational levels, and addressing systemic issues across the educational and other institutions. These goals are inextricably linked and need to be achieved in conjunction with each other. The MPA also acknowledges the role of the Milwaukee community, that the Milwaukee community plays in shaping the learning environment and its consequences on the living environment. We keep striving to improve each one of these facets, and each impact each other. The MPA is governed by an executive board called the Executive Partners. The executive partners consist of the chief executive officers of the education and civic organizations that influence educational outcomes in Milwaukee. These executives currently include the superintendent of the Milwaukee Public Schools, the president of the Milwaukee Board of School Directors, the Executive Director of the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association, the President of the Milwaukee Area Technical College, the Chancellor of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, the President of the Private Industry Council of Milwaukee, and representatives of organizations such as the Greater Milwaukee Committee, the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce, and the private educational institutions in the metropolitan area of Milwaukee. Over the last 8 years, the School of Education and the UWM community has made very intentional efforts through the Milwaukee Partnership Academy to not only affect individual schools, but to help reform the entire public school system, which includes the charter schools. The MPA has focused its attention directly on a systemic approach to change or reform of the Milwaukee Public Schools. Between the major partners of the MPA, we have brought in over $60 million to assist in that work, as well as making substantial contributions of faculty and staff time, materials, and other funding. The grants have come from the National Science Foundation, $20 million, the Carnegie Corporation, $5 million, the National Education Association, $2.5 million, the Gates Foundation, $19 million, the Department of Education, $7 million, much of that primarily targeted to early reading, FIRST funding. And then we've had a number of smaller grants that range from somewhere around $100,000 to $700,000 from local foundations to help carry out our work. The key factor has been the willingness of the MPS, higher education institutions, the business sector, and the larger community to work together to provide better learning opportunities for students and provide better teachers for schools whom are supported throughout the community. Through UWM's initiatives, especially the work of over 20 School of Education faculty, 30 Letters and Sciences faculty members, and about a dozen faculty from the Peck School of the Arts, along with somewhere around 40 to 50 public school and other colleagues from the other institutions, we have been able to make a number of changes. Those changes include what occurs in our teacher education programs at UWM and also the other higher education institutions, whether 4-year or 2-year, and in the public schools in the metropolitan area. And we've targeted especially literacy and mathematics. The induction of new teachers who work with mentor teachers and faculty from education, letters and science, and the fine arts, where we work very directly with teachers in their content areas, and our program lasts for about 2 to 3 years for beginning teachers. And then we also provide real-time professional development in the workplace, as well as provide special academies, courses, summer workshops, and other professional development opportunities. Much of our work in the above areas, like our work with the charter schools, focus on the poorest performing students in Milwaukee, where our aim, especially through the NEA grant and district initiatives, is to improve teaching and learning. Our initial work with the MPA in 2000 focused on literacy and resulted in the district reallocating somewhere around $11 million to help create literacy coaches for each school in the district. That was, at that time, that was about 167 schools, and setting aside funding for literacy specialists to provide professional development and follow-up evaluation assistance for the coaches. We created learning teams to help the information gathering, conduct assessments, and feedback systems directly to each individual school. And this has helped to guide the use of instructional time, space, and the other resources to improve teaching and learning. This year and in the future years, we are again looking to be more highly engaged in the literacy efforts and improvement of our students in Milwaukee. In 2002, we sought and received the $20 million in funding from the National Science Foundation to establish the Milwaukee Mathematics Partnership, which has helped the 4- and 2-year institutions redevelop their curricula, the methods of teaching mathematics for future teachers, and then also, again, to provide professional development for veteran teachers in our classrooms today. This initiative has had excellent success, and we believe helped lead Governor Doyle's support for and the funding of about $10 million to continue this effort in Milwaukee. There have been, over the past 4 years, improved test scores for MPS elementary students, and we're beginning to see some increases in the areas of mathematics as well as reading. Now, we can't empirically show at this time that the MPA's initiatives are directly impacting that, but we believe it is, as those scores began to go up after the initiatives were begun. We've also appreciated the assistance of the Wisconsin Educational Research Center in Madison for their work as we look at the work of how we've impacted some of these innovations. Also, over the past several years, the School of Education's Institute for Excellence in Urban Education has funded a number of charter school research projects. One of these is conducted by Dr. Elizabeth Drami, an assistant professor in the Department of Exceptional Education, who is with us today, and I'm sure she will be glad to discuss some of that work with you as time allows. We also have with us Dr. Cindy Walker, an associate professor in the Department of Educational Psychology. Dr. Walker is a statistician and is director of our school's research office and has been an invaluable consultant and advisor to the Office of Charter Schools. Also joining us, as Provost Chang said, is one of our graduate students, Nicole Traxel, who works with us on research on the charter school initiatives. Professor Drami's work focuses primarily on students with disabilities and their accommodation and success in charter schools. She is also working with a team of colleagues to study the effects of individual education plans and student success in charter schools, and this team is also beginning to work with the New Orleans charter schools, which are the predominant public schools in New Orleans as they rebuild their education system. Another of our professors, Dr. Raji Swaminathan, and a colleague have conducted a study on the ways administrators and teachers in charter schools work to improve academic performance and student success. Dr. Swaminathan is beginning a new research project to further investigate how teacher and administrative leadership improve teaching and learning in the charter schools. These studies have added to the value-added research that is pertinent to the Carnegie Grant to Teachers for a New Era mentioned earlier in my comments. I would also like to point out that the research conducted by our faculty and their colleagues is outside of the evaluation and research framework of the Office of Charter Schools, and thus presents varying perspectives on the work and accomplishments of UW-Milwaukee and other city charter schools. The School of Education has also recently begun seeking funding to start a new research center specifically targeted at the charter schools, which should add to the local, state, and national data on charter schools and their teaching and learning effectiveness and success. Finally, it is important to note that the work that we've done with the MPA, like that of the charter schools, is research and data driven. It is innovative, it is collaborative across a variety of stakeholders, and the focus is clearly on the success of children, teachers, and other personnel who populate our schools. Thank you.
Since we have approximately 10 minutes left of are you a doctor?
11:15.
Oh, beautiful. John Whitty. Are there questions for, we'll go with, I would propose that we ask him all the questions we have of him while we have him, and then we can ask questions of Provost Shank and Dean Thurman and the other professors if there are some. Yes, Tom.
Well, thank you for staying longer. It would have been unfortunate had we had the nation's experts on charter schools and we only get 10 minutes to ask questions. Well, first of all, thank you for coming. It's great to have an expert in the field come before the Board of Regents, a member of the faculty. And of course, the original Wisconsin idea was that it was the faculty that would be the experts that would help guide state policy. And in fact, in the same policy report, we have another article by faculty members on an issue important to this board, and that is research universities' trouble in enrolling low-income students. Well, Professor Whitty, your comments are great and lucid and really chart a path, but that would be important for the legislature. It's unclear to me what it means to this board. And I want to ask you this question about accountability and what you've found perhaps in other states. We really have no one to judge here but the chancellor. We don't have the capability to do any independent analysis. We're not involved, as the Board of Regents, we're not involved in the process at all. I don't think we could hold the dean accountable, for example, at UWM. And the governor didn't call up any of us, I don't think, and say, would point you to the Board of Regents, and oh, by the way, really pay attention to those charter schools. A couple of questions. Both you and the provost said that high-achieving students are not, I don't know how to put it, attracted to the charter schools in Milwaukee. I assume they're staying in MPS.
No, our results cover across MPS more than UWM. And in MPS, in general, the test scores that are available, there's some at-risk schools where you don't have them, I mean boot camp schools and things like that, for example, they start out about the same. What you find is polls, because you get some good students going to high-level ones, and then you get some poorer students going to the at-risk schools. So they don't start out that far behind. They're behind slightly. It's not statistically significant. But the gains over time after they switch to charter schools are what we analyzed in Milwaukee using what we call a fixed effects model. And those gains after they go into the charter schools are positive in Milwaukee. And their starting points are not as low as UWM. It's charters. UWM has I know some of their schools, and they have some of the schools that they start very low. Milwaukee has a lot more charters, and to be honest with you, right now, we don't know what's happening in charters in Milwaukee across it because they've created so many charters in the last year and a half or 2 years that we don't know. The new district superintendent did not do any longer. He believes in chartering, and he's going to small high schools, and so there are about 45. The count has to go daily, literally, in Milwaukee on conversion. So to this date, I can't tell, but our data, which ended in 2001-02, did not indicate that there were that many students that were at the bottom. It wasn't only catering to the bottom. In fact, there were less free lunch kids in charters than there were in MPS.
Okay, then
8% less.
Then I guess I misunderstood a comment in your. That's statewide. That's.
Oh, statewide, that's different.
Okay. All right.
Oh, statewide, yes. What's happening? Unfortunately, in that article, we didn't give you the table. We break out the demographics and the basic lines by Milwaukee and outstate. Outstate, out of Milwaukee, the kids are poorer and doing worse, more likely to be minority. So what's happening in the other cities around the state is they're trying to do something more for at-risk kids. Smaller districts can't have at-risk high schools. One of the first at-risk high schools in the state of Wisconsin, going way back to the early 1990s, was 3 districts. My own hometown of Fort Atkinson, Jefferson, and Watertown came together and formed an at-risk school across those 3 districts because neither one of those districts could afford to have an at-risk school by themselves. They didn't have enough at-risk kids. But together they combined and were able to create a very innovative school. I was happy to say I helped them put the application in about 1993.
One last question from me. You talked about the capability to monitor, and you talked, yes, and we're up to 11 schools here with UWM. Can you discuss a little more about the capability to monitor?
First of all, one of the weaknesses in the charter school movement or the charter school systems nationwide, in my estimation, are that we, number one, right now don't have good data on the accountability side. We do not know how many charters have been revoked. And I have a suspicion that not many are being revoked. Charters are set up for 5-year periods as the modal thing. They can be different, but mostly 5 years. They have accountability standards built right in like UWMs do. And then after 5 years, you're supposed to be able to pull the charter if they're not meeting those standards. Okay? We know that they have pulled charters throughout the country. We don't have any standard to see how many should be pulled. But let me just say one thing. You're not closing public schools very often unless they have declining enrollment. I have very rarely seen public schools closed for achievement gains. I see them closed because of the students are gone, but not for achievement gains. So when we're looking at the standard here, we're all kind of at sea here. I am a little worried that the promise of charter schools was, look, we're going to try something innovative, free us up from regulation, and then hold us accountable to it. I think they've done the first two. I'm not sure we've done the last one, and that's probably the hardest. But I do think that the most likely aspect there is school districts will do that. I think school districts will stay on top of it, or very solid authorizers like UWM that have the staff and have the infrastructure to be able to do that. And also the independent charters in Milwaukee have that infrastructure as well, I would say. So I think we're doing very well on that grounds. I don't know how many should be closed. I don't know how many have been closed. But that's an issue. The accountability issue is a big hanging issue out there. Judy?
I have a question about the effects of, here I am.
That's right.
Whether there is data to show what the effect of the charter schools are having on education more broadly in the same area. My understanding of one of the philosophies of charter schools was that it would, with the innovation and the freedom from some regulation, bring some new information about what works and what doesn't work. And so I'm interested to know whether or not you have any information about what the impact is beyond those particular schools themselves.
Okay, there are two issues here. One of them is called the competitive effects model. And we literally, yesterday, I saw data from Milwaukee that we've done on this. And this is the idea that public schools near charter schools or near densely number of charter schools will improve their test scores over time. Right? Because there'll be a competitive effect. The charter schools, the schools will respond. That's in the very narrow area. Okay, our data yesterday, is literally brand new, we have to go over it, showed there isn't that much competitive effects in Milwaukee. We think there are 2 or 3 things that are positive in the middle schools again, where there's an effect in the middle schools. I wouldn't say outstanding. Here's the problem. It's really difficult to study that. I've been saying this for years and years and years. Famous people, Carolyn Hoxby and others, have these great pronouncements. It's very hard when you have a choice arrangement like in Milwaukee, where you have 180 schools. You have charter schools and voucher schools and all these schools, as well as being able to go to the suburbs to determine what the competitive effects is on a single school. A principal in a single school who may have too many kids or may have declining enrollments. We don't know all those things. So it's very difficult to study that. Now, the other side, what you suggested, was innovation and best practices sorts of things. In other words, are we learning things about how to educate kids that we can transfer to others? That's the question. First of all, innovation has to be understood in a way. A lot of these schools are not absolutely innovative in terms that they're taking something brand new. You don't want that. You don't want that. You know how many new businesses fail in the United States every year? About 60% that start. What you get in these cases is the following. You get tried methods that are tried elsewhere, and then they're adapted to the locality, and it provides districts with a way to provide schools they couldn't. Montessori schools in Eau Claire, Montessori schools in Appleton, they didn't have them before. And they took a Montessori plan, which has been around for 100 years, okay, close to 100 years. They adapted it to their circumstances, and they were able to put that school in. So in that sense, they have a new opportunity for parents, a new opportunity for teachers, not necessarily a brand new concept. Now, we do have some brand new concept schools, too, but I would say they're the minority. A lot of it, when we looked at the charter schools that opened in Milwaukee, and we aligned them with MPS's magnet-type schools, there were a lot of overlap in the type of instruction. That they were able to expand that instruction. And these out districts were really able to do things that they weren't doing before. And they've done some very creative new things. I mean, there's an engineering and science school. I had the wonderful opportunity to evaluate pro bono a school in Oshkosh, Wisconsin that is connected to the EAA, the Experimental Aircraft Association, and it's been a big success in a controlled environment, random assignment experiment, and the NSF and people around the country are interested in that curriculum, and it's being expanded. They teach air and space science across the curriculum in 3rd and 4th grades. That's what they do. And we have boosts up in test scores in science and math. And it's just a little bitty program to start. I've got like 100 kids. I'm going to follow those 100 kids until they die or until I die. I want to see if the girls go to engineering school. I want to see if we get more girl engineers out of that. I really do. I want to see if they take hard math and science courses in high school. They're getting there now. My first group is getting to high school, and I can't wait to see them. And in Oshkosh, actually, the attrition rate isn't so large, so I can really kind of follow them.
Thank you, Professor Whitty, for being here, and it's good to see you again. I wanted to follow up on Regent Loftus's question about accountability, because I heard Rita Chang talk about the longitudinal study that they're doing currently with the charters at UWM. It sounds intriguing to me, and I wanted your reaction. Will it help to build in accountability, and would there be any additional suggestions that you might make to this board about tracking accountability?
Yes.
In that area?
I'm not exactly sure how the longitudinal arrangement is in Milwaukee, but the longitudinal arrangement that everyone should be looking at now, and this is No Child Left Behind for the public schools as well, and you heard the words, it's value-added education. You want to know the changes in the growth in education of children as they progress through school. That has to be the measure. The reason is because kids start at different levels, and so if you just look at cohorts, it's like taking the MPS cohort at any time and saying, here's the state average. Well, come on. Of course you know what that's going to look like. You know what that's going to look like. Right. What you want to know in MPS is how fast those kids grow compared to the kids in Green Bay or in Beloit or in Madison. That's what you want. That's called value added. There's piloting under No Child Left Behind under the new provisions that are coming out, because when you get a cohort snapshot, which you get in No Child Left Behind, you get great distortion, because particularly if you don't control for the backgrounds of kids. So you really want to be able to track kids, single kids. We've got a Wisconsin ID. We need the Wisconsin ID for students so we can track kids over time. Now, I don't happen to be in favor of testing kids every year, even though it's beneficial to me as a researcher to do it. I don't agree with that law. And I don't agree with a lot of aspects of No Child Left Behind. I really don't. But that's the way you want to do the accountability, because you want to track the growth. There's one other thing that you have to keep in mind, and that is a lot of these schools are at-risk schools. And I mean they're really at risk. I mean, I went to a school, at a case study of a school in Milwaukee. It's called it's a boot camp school, where they're greeted in the morning by 5 guys who scare the hell out of me because they're about this wide and they're in fatigues, and they do the first hour of physical education. These kids, I said, my gosh. I said, what's your goal educationally for these kids? And the principal, the executive director looks at me and said, well, he says, these kids have all dropped out of schools. They've all been kicked out of schools. Okay? They're not going to be allowed back in. It's this school or the streets. Okay? So my goal is, if I can get those kids, a percentage of these kids, into a real school. This is a school to teach them how to go to school, was the slogan. Into a real school, and they're there 4 months later, that's a success. Okay? That's an interesting standard. No test scores, no nothing. I looked at those kids. There were kids in there that were 14 years old reading at first grade level. Okay? What do I mean? At at-risk schools like that, you can't use the standard assessments. You can't use a test score. It's just incorrect to do it. They aren't going to do well in standardized achievement. They need other things. And a number of these schools across Wisconsin are geared at kids like that. One of the schools, another school up north, they get half of their kids come out of the jail in the morning. Okay? Another busload comes from the detox place. But now, this is a difficult environment, right? How do you judge that school? You can't just sort of say, well, how are they doing on proficiency in the math test? So it's not easy. But when you got the standard kids, you really want to use the value added. That's what you want to do.
Mary.
Thank you. Professor Whitty, a pleasure to hear you speak today. And no PowerPoint was also welcomed. The old-fashioned way, I enjoyed it very much. 2 questions.
The achievement scores are impressive with the charter schools, but I'm just wondering two things. One is class sizes versus public schools in general. Are the classes generally smaller in a charter in Milwaukee and outstate versus the public schools in Milwaukee and outstate? And also on special ed, there were some figures from UWM on the percent of special eds in the charters. How does that compare to public schools in Milwaukee and outstate? Are they similar percentages?
Charter schools throughout the United States are smaller, considerably smaller than regular schools. When you compare them to a middle school to middle school, high school to high school, elementary, they're smaller. That's true in the state of Wisconsin, about half the size. That means smaller class sizes in most cases, but remember, we have a lot of smaller class sizes now at the elementary level in urban cities in the United States. So we're not at the 30 for grades, kindergarten through 3. I mean, there's been a considerable reduction in class sizes. So we're in the 18, 19 range there for most people, but they tend to be somewhat smaller. And certainly the at-risk kids are smaller. Sometimes they're almost one-on-one or 1 to 5. So that's the first issue. The second one was, I'm sorry.
Well, the percentage of students with special ed.
Special ed's an issue. It's a real issue in charter schools. It's also a reason I think to have them in districts. I hate to say this if you can do it, because a lot of charter schools are terrified by special ed situations because they're terrified of lawsuits. They know what can happen. They don't have the resources often within the school to take care of special ed kids. So they don't have the reading tutors and others to do that. What they often do is contract with often the public school system to provide those services for them. And they probably do not have as high a percentage in general of disabled kids, exceptional education kids, as the public school does. I don't think it's a dumping ground or anything like that where they're just getting them away and that's leaving the public with that many more, because these are still public schools. It's a real issue in the private school situation. It's a bigger issue in the private school situation. But it still is a somewhat issue. When I go to the National Charter Schools meetings and somebody comes from Washington that does ex-ed as a specialty, the room is packed. I mean, literally standing room only because they're trying to get help and make sure they got the resources.
So would you say then, generally speaking, class sizes are probably smaller in a charter school?
Yes.
And generally speaking, the percent of special ed is probably smaller as well?
Yes. I'm sure that's the case.
Question, you expressed concern and recommended that there be a legislative change to allow an appeal of the school district's decision not to allow a charter school. What would be the process, and considering what happened in Ohio when they didn't obviously have much of a process?
I'm not sure. I don't want to, I'd like to make it a hard appeal. Okay, I'd like the decisions to remain with the districts. The only situations that I'd like to go somehow, and I don't have an exact formula for you, and I've actually changed a little bit on this, because before I said that the state appeal board will just be an outlet and people will just circumvent the districts. I don't want that. It has to first go through the district. I mean, in many states, they have state authorizing boards where you can go right to the state board and get authorized. That I don't want. That'll create a different situation. What you want is an appeal where people have repeatedly come up with decent charter school plans, and there's not good reasons to turn those down, except that somehow school boards are often reluctant about this. I mean, I've talked in detail with our case studies when we went out there, and I can tell you how they started in these school boards. I went to one place, they said, we don't charter schools here. And then I said, well, how come you have all these charters? And they said, well, because a group of people came in here, asked me to charter a school. We said, we don't charter schools here. They went out and created a private school. And then this person pointed down the street, and he said, you see that school? There's 100 kids in that school at $5,000 a head. He's losing $500,000 in that school, and so they started chartering schools. But the school boards were reluctant. Now, that's a natural thing. But over time, if there's just a wall there, and there's good proposals coming in, I think there has to be some kind of an outlet for that. But not a state authorizing board, a state appeals board.
Who's going to make the final decision? Is it going to be an appeal to the superintendent or state DPI?
It would be an appeal to a state board. Could be involved, could be a DPI organization, could be independent. Okay. In many cases, they're independent. When they have state school boards in different cases, they're sometimes an offshoot of the state school boards. But most of these are independent, and some of them are very powerful. New York, for example, where the state authorizes an awful lot. It does a very good job, actually. I have to say that. New York does a good job with it. In Ohio, you saw the case. Ohio has been a mess for a long, long time. they were a mess in the voucher program. A lot of those people that are authorizing there, the biggest authorizer there, was literally thrown out of the voucher program because his schools were so bad in the private school voucher program, and he went over to charter schools. And so we've known about Ohio for a long time. There are some states that are not doing this right. Michigan's not. I think Michigan's not doing as good a job as it could either.
We've got maybe a chance for one more question. Jeff, maybe two. It's 3 minutes now before Professor.
Okay, I want him to catch his plane.
Right. So,
I have a question about measuring success. Obviously, there are lots of criteria for success, but it seems to me that the most important one is student proficiency. And I saw that Provost Chang said that measuring student proficiency is it's most important to be done looking at the results of the same students over time. Now, when we are comparing the results of the same students over time in charter schools versus public schools, and we have a attrition rate, at least in Milwaukee, of 30%. In some schools, more than 50%.
In a year.
Year after year. How do we compare the results of those students in charter schools versus public? What is the retention rate in public schools, by the way, in Milwaukee? Does anyone know?
You mean
MPS?
A lot of them within MPS is within the district. So even though children may be changing schools,
Correct.
I think they're moving into other schools within the district. Because our comparison is MPS as a district.
Okay. So you track the same students in a different school.
It's everyone.
Okay.
The district is kind of the population
Okay.
from a statistical perspective. So everyone would be in there. All the kids. So unless the child's moving out of the district, they would be included in it.
Okay.
But it's a very good question. You should be a researcher. We've been playing with problems of attrition for a long time. They're that high. And that's why I mentioned the Wisconsin State ID, the student ID. If we have a Wisconsin student ID of some sort, we can track them into other districts, and even across states, actually, but particularly into other districts, and then we can keep track of them. Right now, if they leave MPS, she's absolutely correct that most of the movement, we studied it for us, and we found 75% of the movement was within MPS. A number of years ago. I don't know if it's changed. Probably hasn't changed very much. So, but you're losing 25 outside, and also, but they also go to private schools. So, again, if you had an ID, you could track them to a lot of places.
So a 3-year cohort would be an accurate measurement. You could result in an accurate measurement comparison.
3 years, you don't use the word cohort. 3 years of tracking a child. The cohort would be that's usually that gives you an idea. We like 5. Our longitudinal study in the voucher program is 5, slated for 5 years. And we know that we're going to come down with baseline data in a couple of weeks, and we know that everybody will make their judgment right there without any growth, without any longitudinal anything. It'll just look at those cohort numbers, and I hope they don't. We're going to try to make sure they don't, but it's very difficult to communicate these things. 3 years gives you a good idea. 5 years gives you a much better idea.
Thank you very much. Additional questions of UWM? Yes, Mike.
I like the work as it's laid out that UWM is doing. I'm struggling a little bit. Maybe you can help me with this. That your measurements, and maybe I'm just getting the wrong impression, but your measurements are against MPS. Success? Is that our definition of success?
Hold on one quick second. I think we need mics or access to mics. So if whoever's going to answer a question, we should probably go to a mic, and that would be helpful. So, Mike, did you have a specific person, or are you just asking UWM, whoever's appropriate? Okay.
I guess I'm, as a faculty advisor and kind of the measurement staff person, I think that's why I was given this question. So,
and your name, please.
Cindy Walker. I'm Dr. Cindy Walker from Department of Educational Psychology at UWM, and I'm the faculty advisor to the Office of Charter Schools. That's a good question. Is MPS our standard of success? The fact of the matter is that a lot of our children, a lot of the students who come into the charter schools are from MPS. And so I think a lot of the parents who seek out the charter schools are kind of looking for something that will work for their children. So I think that's why we made that the comparison. And I believe it was the belief that that was what people wanted to see. from, I think that's what Bob Catman's people wanted to see. How are our charter schools doing in comparison to the schools where the children would be going if there weren't charter schools?
There might be another level of comparison, is I guess what I'm getting at is that, yes, you have that comparison, but I don't know what the next level of comparison
I think we also do comparisons with the state. We compare our schools not only to MPS, but also to the state overall.
I don't know, maybe this question is for Libby, but I wanted to go back to Professor Whitty's point about competition for students. And so you have the per pupil amount going to with the student. But in Milwaukee, since that's one school district, that competition for students because of the desire to capture that state aid, is that out of the equation? Am I saying this right? All right, so I can see where in other places in the state you have declining enrollments, you want students, and there's a charter school and you get the money with the student. The money goes to the district and then is passed on to the...
I think one of the hardest things even for me, and John's gone, is that, and I assume it was probably kind of hard for the whole board, John kept flipping from, he was talking about charter schools in general. And I just think it's really important that we all understand the different kinds of charters. And you kept, both Peggy and Tom kept trying through their questions about accountability, I thought, to bring to the table, just so we all understand the different governance models in our state charter law. And then based on those governance models, there are different funding mechanisms related to that. So the 2R charters are funded differently. And Brian, do you want to speak a little to that? It is a source of irritation for the rest of the state because of the way that they are perceived as being funded, that it is taking money away from all of the state school districts. Correct, Brian?
This is the Milwaukee charter.
Our 2R, not the Milwaukee. I thought the topic today was our purview, which is, the UWM and UW Parkside charters. Right. Those are referred to in the law as 2R charters. And that's one form of charter. Then the City of Milwaukee charters. And then most of the charter schools, when he was talking about anywhere else outside of Milwaukee or the one UW Parkside, all those other charters are either instrumentalities of their local school district. So they're governed, well, this gets more information than anybody really probably wants. Okay.
I mean,
All right.
Milwaukee is a chartering authority also. I should say, the school district has the bulk of the Milwaukee charters. And then there's R11, which are the 2R charters, and then there's the City of Milwaukee, and I can't remember how many they have.
And also the MATC has the authority. They don't currently have any. So
what are the UWM charters called?
2R charters.
Okay, so that's what we're interested in.
Brian, could you just talk how the 2R charter schools, to answer Regent Loftus's funding question?
Again, I'm Brian Potke, Assistant Superintendent at DPI. We have 17 charters this year that are in this 2R group, 11 at the UW-Milwaukee, as Regent Davis mentioned, 1 at UW Parkside, and then the City of Milwaukee charters 5 schools. The payment mechanism for these charter schools has been around, I think, we're going into our 10th year of this, or 9th year, somewhere around there. Each charter school receives this year $7,669 per full-time equivalent child. The state funds that in a manner that's been directed by the governor and legislature, that we total up the amount of money for all the kids involved. It's going to be about $43, $44 million this year. And those funds are drawn from all 426 school districts this year as a deduction from their general school aids as a percentage. So in each district, from Washington Island to Milwaukee, each district pays a proportionate share to fund that $43 million.
They pay or they don't get as much money?
Well, they don't get as much money. So essentially, it's deducted from their school aids.
It's the school board.
Right.
Well, I don't know.
But they see it.
So 17 charters,
This year.
43 million.
Right, and then there isn't an add-on for Racine, so it makes it about 44 million because the Racine School District does receive some money back under the law.
So that money goes to these UWM charters directly?
Correct.
Oh, I'm sorry, I just haven't been paying attention.
17 schools in total. Correct.
Judy.
I'm not going to ask a question from you, Brian, at this point, but I do want to make a couple of comments because I know there are many of you who know that I've had a real interest in this topic, and I just want to make a couple of comments at this point. I first want to say that UW-Milwaukee has been very gracious to me as I've asked questions of them and visited as well, and that has been extremely helpful, and I really appreciate the information that's been offered as well as including the current report. And under the I would draw attention to page 4 of the report, and I'll just read it. You don't need to look it up, but just to say that first point under guiding principles is the charter school should be developed to improve the overall education conditions for children who live in the city. And to me, that is fundamental. So that my interest has not only been on how well are these schools doing, and of course we're all interested in that, but it has also been what is the effect on the greater education picture in this very challenging urban area. And I do know that is of a concern to UW-Milwaukee as well. And while I recognize the competitive point as valid as maybe hoping that a charter school will in fact bring out have a competitive factor that improves education more broadly, and I don't dismiss that, but I also feel that especially in this day and age as we talk about collaboration and cooperation, that a lot of what needs to happen in Milwaukee and especially any other urban area, and we are developing others in the state, that there be a strong cooperative effort in addressing these issues. And I think we heard a lot of that this morning, and I appreciated that. So my interest in this is not only are we operating good schools in our system in Milwaukee that are under our aegis, but that in fact it is improving public and strengthening public education in general in Milwaukee, and that I have been interested in that whatever we're doing does not weaken MPS from their ability to address the needs of their students. So that's been my interest, and there's been a good deal of response to that, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Tom, can I just hear from few more people? Go ahead, Mike.
I just wanted to make one comment that's not a question as much as it is a hope. And I've said it before, but I think it's worth repeating in this context. I think one of the great, to me, advantages of UW being involved in whatever limited fashion it will be involved in this is the opportunity for the research and innovation with respect to student teaching and learning, teaching and learning.
Yes.
I think that's the crucial thing. How can we help children who are in the city of Milwaukee or anywhere else better learn what Jeff calls proficiency in various things or whatever? We all want that. It's clear that the way we've done it in the past hasn't always worked for particular groups of students. And the more we can learn about that through the research of the university that we're responsible for, ultimately, the better it is. So I hope we don't lose sight in all of this of that mission, that unique thing, that while you could do that in theory with the public schools as well, it's different when you have within your education department the entity that is holding these schools accountable to determine whether their charters will continue.
And that's part of our mission.
Yeah, and I hope that the dean and the provost and others will really work hard at that to ensure that our very fine faculties in these areas do use these opportunities for real research on how children best learn, how these children best learn who are in the schools, and how we can help make that happen, as well as testing in a reasonable fashion innovative ideas. I think it's very important.
Would you care to respond, Provost Chang or Dean Thurman?
There are a couple of things that I think that would be really important, and that is to remind the board and ourselves that in many cases we need to track more than 3 years. That's the data that we had, and that as Professor Whitty indicated, this is hard work. And the projects that we have begun, and certainly Liz's work, and I know she's got a one-page handout to provide on exceptional ed, is also an important example of the research that can be done as a result of chartering being one of the many projects that we have in the school focused on improving education for children in the city of Milwaukee. The other comment I would make is that there are literally hundreds of schools that come to us asking to be chartered, and at this point 11 have met our standards for that purpose, and one of the reasons that we use in the selection, the criteria, is indeed can we learn from the model that is under our authorization.
Thank you. Listen, guys, we are behind by a half hour. I'm thinking it's at 10:30, so sorry, Mr. President.
It says 11:30.
I now know that. I just whispered to my colleague that, oh, my goodness, I think we're behind. So I know you two have questions, and I
Just one more question from me.
Okay,
Rita.
one for you, and then we're done. I'm sorry, everybody.
Rita, the question remains, at least in my mind, the capability to monitor 11 schools. And I want to endorse very much what Mike said, that the expectation of the research results that come out of your charter schools have to be much higher than the expectations of other charter schools. But the question is the accountability structure at UWM for this. When we were mailed your organizational chart, I found it interesting, not all of the arrows connected with the boxes, but when you put it up on the board there, they were connected. And the question is, who does the director apparently doesn't report to the dean of the School of Education.
Yes.
Yeah, that's mine.
Okay.
Okay, so now that's the question.
Well, now, but so you're involved in the review of the applications and the granting of the charters.
We leave that up to the advisory committee and the director to make the recommendation. The recommendation comes to me. I pass that recommendation on to the provost and the chancellor.
But you can say yes or no at that
Yes.
point. All right.
Your turn.
Okay, it's to Provost Chang. I appreciated Judy reminding us about the overall education of the students in the city of Milwaukee. And I really appreciated your 3-year evidence of what happens to students. But I guess what I'm kind of found wanting is I don't see the evidence of how specifically that translates into the curriculum that your education students are taught, and how that translates into better teachers, or some of the things that would help us to evaluate whether or not that mission, that critical mission of why we charter in the first place, is so important, or maybe not.
I may not be the best one to address this. There may be better examples here, but let me give it a shot and then turn it over for some clarification. We really see chartering as one of the many strategies to better understand the educational needs of the children in the city of Milwaukee. And certainly the proficiency test results from the DPI test is very important in that process, because that is what we are judged on from the external stakeholders. However, the MAP examination that I talked about is our attempt to get to drill down on specific children's instructional needs. And 06-07 is the first year that we administered that. So those test results are just starting to be implemented in the schools. And of course, the satisfaction surveys that we do for parents and staff and students also provide that indirect assessment of whether or not we are achieving those goals. So you know, on a broad sweep, that is an example of the attempts that we have to really get at whether the curriculum meets not only the state standards, but the individual students' instructional needs.
Okay. Last thing I'd say to everybody is we all have a copy of the Charter School Handbook. And this is a handbook that is given to every one of our 11 charter schools. And so at your leisure, and when you're really looking for some interesting reading, please feel free to read cover to cover the Charter School Handbook. I want to thank all of our guests for the presentations, which very much helped in our edification. And with that, I turn it back over to you, Chairman or President. Or Chairman, President.
I'll call to order a meeting of the Board of Regents of the University of Wisconsin System. Would the Secretary please read the roll?
Regent Bartel?
Here. Here.
Burmester? Regent Conley-Kiesler? Here.
Yes, sure. What we do with it is here.
It's not just these charters.
Here.
Okay.
Here.
Smith?
Here.
Here.
Good. Thank you very much.
Sure.
The first time that Kevin Riley had an opportunity to address us after he was appointed as president of the UW system, he outlined several principles that would be hallmarks of his administration. One of those was his pledge to be accountable to the stakeholders of the UW system. I think Kevin has done an excellent job in working toward that pledge, and today we're going to hear about another step in that process. And to do that, I would like to call upon Senior Vice President Rebecca Martin.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to be here this morning to let you know about a very exciting national project that we are a part of as a UW system, joining together all of our institutions to be part of the voluntary system of accountability. I think that most of you have seen in various places in the media in the last several months an increasing call for information about higher education. If any of you were traveling, as I was at the beginning of this week, you might have seen in USA Today a 2-page spread on a source of information that we actually use here, the National Survey of Student Engagement, providing information. So this is clearly an issue that that we are being asked to address by people across our nation. The Voluntary System of Accountability is a national project sponsored by our two major professional associations, the National Association of State and Land-Grant Colleges and Universities and the American Association of State Colleges and Universities. And we have been actively involved in this from the beginning. This up on the screen now, I have for you several issues that have really provided the impetus for this movement. This is a call for transparent, consistent information, much of which is already available. We have much of the information that we are being asked to provide through this process is already on our websites. It's certainly in our Achieving Excellence report, with which you are already all familiar, but it's not present in a way where it's easy to find, where you can easily compare one institution to another. Part of the impetus behind this development is a coming together of institutions of public higher education to provide a richer picture to prospective students and their families than can be found in the college guides, than can be found in one place or another that people look. So one of the things one of the impetuses for this work came from the Spellings Commission in a report that came out about a year ago calling for better data, better accountability from higher education. So this is about providing information for college choice, but it's also about providing information that will help drive investment in higher education, trying to demonstrate to our publics, our constituencies across the country, that higher education is an important public good. The development of the voluntary system of accountability is something where the higher education community has come together to take responsibility for providing this information, for providing the accountability that we've been asked to respond to. We're responding to the call for greater, more uniform information across all sectors of public higher education, and more than 70 institutions have been involved in this initial development. We have been actively involved here with Chancellor Rick Wells chairing one of the task forces that worked on this. Julie First-Bovey, Provost from UW-Stout, served on another task force. Denny Rourke from our UW Health Office and Terry Thill from UW-La Crosse were also very involved in the initial development. And all of our system institutions have signed on to a letter that Kevin sent yesterday, I believe, to our two professional organizations, the sponsoring bodies, telling them that we are going to be coming forward and joining as a system. I'd like to just point out, if you take a look at the template for this website, which is in all of your folders, that this is really intended to provide information for four-year undergraduate institutions. So it's aiming at baccalaureate institutions. But if we're going to really going to participate in this as a system, we are also committed to finding a way for our UW colleges to be involved as well, and we will be working with Ms. Olczyk and ask you to develop a template for the UW colleges that will provide parallel information as also. The audience for this information is, first of all, prospective students and their families. From our perspective, that's the most immediate use for this information, but there are others clearly who will be looking to this source of information for accountability information about our programs. So I would invite you now to just flip through and take a look at what this template looks like. What this represents will be a website that will be on each one of our campus websites. There will be a college portrait logo on either the home page or on the admission page for each one of our campuses. There will be standard comparable data and elements that focus all the way through on on each one of our campuses. And so what you just look through this, the first part of this is student and family information. This provides information on student demographics, student success, graduation rates, retention rates. There's on the page 2, there's a cost calculator where you can put in information about your own situation and get a sense of what it's going to cost you to come to college. There's also information on special characteristics of individual institutions. So while this will look the same on the face of it for each one of our campuses, so you can compare across campuses, or you could compare UW-Eau Claire with Mankato State or another campus that you might be interested in. There also are ways that each institution will be able to individualize the template to provide information on the special characteristics of the campus. The second part of the portrait starts, I believe, on page 4, and that is information on the student experience and student perceptions. That information will come from the National Survey of Student Engagement. We have been participating in this survey since, I believe, the year 2000. And we have been reporting that data in both our Achieving Excellence report and in our institutional accountability reports for many years. I'm not sure exactly when that started, but this has been public information for us for a long time. That's not the case with all participants in what we call the NESI survey, but that will be something that we will be reporting as part of this. And then the third piece of this has to do with student learning outcomes. And this is the area where there still remains a considerable amount of work to be done. We do not have a good standard tool for learning outcomes assessment that we can all be confident in using at this stage. The project has identified 3 such tools that we can use on our campuses, and we will be working with the faculties at each of our institutions to determine which is the best tool for their particular program. There also is a major grant, FIPSI grant, from federal funding of $2.4 million that has just been awarded to this project to try to further develop the learning assessment tools so that they will be more robust and more indicative of the learning that's going on our campuses. So this is the one piece that we are still needs considerable work. I would like to just kind of link this to some other important efforts that you've already heard about. Clearly, this is another step in the leadership role that the UW system has played in public accountability in higher education for many years. In 1993, we had one of the first accountability reports in the country. Again, that's our Achieving Excellence report that you are familiar with. So we're reporting not only at the system level, but also at the individual campus level. It's very much a part of the way we are approaching Know How to Go in the whole college as possible effort in order to get information into the hands of students and their families that will help them make that important decision about where to go to college. And it's also related in important ways in the learning assessment piece to the project that we talked about at our last meeting in River Falls, the LEAP project, the College Learning for the New Global Century. And in fact, the group of people in the organization that has sponsored that whole liberal education initiative is part of the grant funding project to take that learning assessment piece to the next stage. So looking forward, we expect that this project will be formally launched in December after the 2 governing boards formally adopt later this month at their national meetings the work that's been done. They will be continuing to work on the template to refine it. So while we're rolling this out in the next several months, we're going to learn as we go along about how well it works and look to seeing it further develop. There's going to be a national governing board monitoring that progress and working on with a number of institutions, including ours, on things like how do we get the 2-year colleges represented and other issues like that. Our campuses have already begun to pull together the information for the first pieces of this template, and we hope to have college portraits live on all of our UW campus websites, at least for the first several segments of this sometime this spring. So we're very excited about this. We think that it tells a great story about the resources that we have for the residents of Wisconsin, and we look forward, once we're up and running, to come back and actually show you some of the UW campus college portrait website.
Are there any questions of Rebecca? Tom?
Well, a comment and then a question, and this is the comment. I assume this is a not too veiled of an effort to break the monopoly of the U.S. News and World Report college ranking, but that's the comment. The question is, what value is this to the Regents? Can we compare campuses in the institution using this?
This is intended to be information that you could compare campuses. We are not collecting all this data in one place at this stage, and because the information is really aimed primarily at prospective students and their families. However, this, as we get further into this approach, we are going to be looking at the Achieving Excellence report and looking for ways to pull this information that we're gathering here into the report that we provide to you on an annual basis. You won't see that in the next version of the report because that's already being worked on now, but a year hence from now, we expect that the Achieving Excellence report will build on much of the data that we are reporting here. So I think that, yes, you will see some of that. What I think is most important, that what I'm trying to convey for you today, is the accountability that measures that we are providing to the public. I think it's important that you know about that.
Any other questions for Rebecca? Kevin, would you make a comment?
Yes, just one comment. It goes to the question of reputations in higher education, and really to Regent Lofton's question about comparability. If you look at the very back page, page 5 of the handout that you have in your packet on the portrait, there's a mock-up of some scores on one of the instruments there in the lower right part of the page. It shows a freshman score in critical thinking, senior score, and a freshman score in a writing essay, and then a senior score. One of the interesting effects on the reputational talk in higher ed that this has already started to have, and I think will have much more of an effect going forward in states that have used this already, is that some of the institutions whose students, when they come into the institution, are not as academically proficient as the beginning freshmen at other institutions, find that over the course of the 4 years, when their value added is measured, there's more value added by the institutions that have freshmen coming in who are not as proficient. So that goes to, in my mind, a new way of framing the question of reputation. How good is an institution at what it does?
Right.
And I think we're going to have some of that conversation as a result of this effort going forward. And I think that's a healthy conversation for all of us.
Chancellor Wells?
Just quickly, this is to be loaded, so to speak, in 3 parts. The informational piece, the student experience and perception piece, we should be able to get up within the next 6 months or so. Then the learning outcomes, learning gains, value-added piece, which really probably won't be up for 3 to 4 years. Because the 3 instruments, the CLA, CAP, and MAP, I'm just bringing this to your attention so you're not surprised. We've gone through this on our campus. That's where we have concerns, and we need to proceed with caution on using those instruments because they're the best of what's out there in terms of trying to get at these higher learning skills, cognitive skills, but they have some significant limitations. So the gain scores that come out of those, for example, are more explained by prior learning and general maturation. It's very hard to really tease out so-called institutional effect that you're looking for. And there are other methodological issues. And there's a person we got on our campus, her name is Trudy Banta, and she just released a very good essay yesterday on a primer for being cautious and careful. She's supportive of this. She and I had a good discussion on our campus in a panel. But there's some real issues here, and we want to make sure that our faculty are fully engaged and that we use the grant nationally and hopefully other grants to really work on it. So with that 5th page, I think 3 or 4 years from now, it might be a little different. And the last point is the layers underneath the college portrait, which is supposed to be one click away from the main page. It should be on your main page. The campuses can layer information underneath it is extremely important, particularly in this section, because it's a way of getting at all the other types of assessments that you're doing in the majors and things of that sort. So I just wanted to raise that caution so you're not surprised when you hear a debate on our campus.
I think part of the value of our being in early with the real risks that you get, if not misinformation, misunderstanding out of this rather than clear understanding, and that is a risk. But the upside of this is, as a system now, each of our institutions, and working together as a system, we'll have a chance to shape the improvement of those instruments as we go forward.
Okay. Any other questions of Rebecca? Good.
Regent President Bradley, I hope I've gotten us back on schedule.
Yes, you have. Yes, you have. You are good.
Thank you. Could I, Mark, ask one?
Yes, Regent Spector.
I came across this in the Chronicle of Higher Education. It said 19 college systems will measure progress in educating minority and needy students. And it listed a bunch of schools that had gathered together, not exactly like this, but in a collaborative manner, as you say, to study this very important issue. It includes the California State University system and others. Were we approached for that? Are any of our schools involved?
Yes. Well, yes, we were approached, and we had some conversations with the other institutions that are in this now. It was really sponsored through an organization called NASH, N-A-S-H, which is the National Association of System Heads. Nothing necessarily to do with weeping, but NASH is the association. And we were out, I think, in front of them with this, with our equity scorecard piece in many ways, so that what we did was, Senior Vice President Martin went up to their most recent meeting to talk about the equity scorecard before they actually signed on to do this. And we are going to track the equity scorecard work we're doing with this national project. So we're not. We hope so. We hope so. And, it's an important effort. It's an effort we want to be part of, but we just thought we were out ahead of it, and we wanted to keep pushing ahead with the equity scorecard without having to shift and sign on to a bunch of other things that at this point could take us off point.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. I think it's important to observe again that this is another in a line of efforts from the UW system to be a leader in the nation and accountability. And I also want to thank the chancellors for unanimously and enthusiastically signing on to this effort. That concludes the part of our agenda on the voluntary system of accountability, and we'll next turn to the biennial budget update, and I call upon President Riley.
You've all been waiting for the biennial budget, and waiting a long time for it, I might add. Well, I will remind you that on Friday, October 26th, I guess it will be 2 weeks ago tomorrow, the governor and Speaker Mike Hipsch and a number of other legislative leaders came here to the Madison campus at Memorial Union to sign the 2007-09 budget into law, and then some of this went over to the UW-M campus in Milwaukee and basically repeated the ceremony. Marshall McLuhan, used to say famously, the medium is the message. And I think it's interesting that the governor and others chose our two campuses to sign the budget. The medium, or at least here the venue, I think is part of the message, that there's a renewed recognition at the state level of just how central all our campuses, all our institutions are to the future of Wisconsin. So we were very pleased that we were the venue for the signing of the state budget. And I had the pleasure of introducing the governor at both of those events, which did mark the end, finally, of a very lengthy budget-making process. And I would say that at the end of that process, I think the state made a very prudent and strategic reinvestment in the UW system, recognizing our real capacity to fuel economic growth, to improve the quality of life for everybody in the state. But I think today may be a day when we should ask ourselves a little bit, well, how did we get there? I think human nature being what it is, we all when we have something happen which we think is a failure, that something that didn't work, we say, well, what didn't work? We have to figure this out to avoid it the next time. And sometimes we don't put quite the same emphasis on looking at, well, we had some success here. What caused the success? How can we understand what we did so we can do more of that the next time and do some things that maybe we decide weren't contributors to the success if we had some? Well, here's my back-of-the-envelope analysis of why we were successful. In this budget process, we focused on Wisconsin. Just as Advantage Wisconsin, the strategic planning effort we're involved in now, is an outside-in process. The growth agenda was really focused not on the university's desires, but on the state's needs. And the people who contributed to the development of this plan made their voices heard here at the state capitol in many, many ways. Students from every institution signed a joint letter to the legislature. And I want to thank Regent Shields and Regent Thomas, who were co-conspirators in helping that to happen with their student colleagues. And I think the students in this budget cycle were more engaged and more effectively engaged than in any time in my 11 years in this state. We had a number of legislators who themselves went on record writing to their leadership in their parties and sometimes across party lines, saying that a solid, prudent investment in the UW system was what their constituents wanted and needed. We had many business and community leaders, as you know, from across the state, local elected officials who stepped forward to say the growth agenda was important to their company or to their industry or to their town or to their city or to their region. Very, very effective work organized by the chancellors on each of their campuses in each of their regions. We had more than 30,000 UW-Madison alumni who wrote to their legislators urging that the state fund their alma mater and the system at levels that would preserve quality and protect the institution's reputation for academic excellence. All of that kind of advocacy and more was part of what I'll call our third party strategy here. That is, it's easy even for Board of Regent members to be discounted some when they go down to the legislature because you're appointed to advocate for the university. It's even easier for legislators sometimes to discount folks who get paychecks from the university because we're paid to speak on its behalf. But when third parties like the ones I've mentioned come in and talk about the value of the university, legislators, elected officials tend to listen perhaps a little more closely. And from what I've heard from the governor and legislators, that mode of communication really did hit home with them. I think Regent Bradley has had some of this experience in his recent visits with legislators. Maybe some of the rest of you have. I've been told by a number of legislators, oh, you people really had a lot of people contacting us this time around. I mean, they knew it, they felt it, they heard it, and it worked. I think they did listen. And we see the results of that listening. The governor included the growth agenda in his executive budget. Joint Finance showed bipartisan support for the growth agenda and there for the new academic facilities, too, that we will need to carry it out. And in the end, fair-minded legislative leaders from both houses, both parties, listened and passed a good budget that eliminated targeted cuts that had been on the table, that fully funded the growth agenda, and that funded our recruitment and retention fund as well. So now, after catching a half breath, remember this got signed on October 26th, there's lots more work to do. I want to especially emphasize today that a competitive pay plan for our faculty and staff is absolutely crucial. And let me remind you where we are with that. This board requested, if you recall, a 5.23% pay increase in each year of the 07-09 biennium back in December of 2006, so almost a year ago now. And you asked at that time in December, almost a year ago, that none of that 5.23% be funded through tuition because we wanted to hold tuition down as low as possible. That 5.23% pay increase would have closed the gap over 4 years, not over 2, because the gap was too big to make up in that amount of time, but over 4 years between our median faculty salaries and those of our peers. In August 2007, when you passed the entire budget and submitted it to the governor and the legislature for our budget, in order to hold the tuition increase down to 5.5%, we included a 4% pay plan estimate in our 2007-8 budget. So we backed off some, that original request of 5.23%, in order to hold the tuition down as low as we possibly could. Now, a 4% increase each year for 4 years again, not just in 07-09, but for 4 years over the next 2 biennia. The 4% increase in each year for 4 years, along with the recruitment and retention fund, which we now have, would narrow the pay gap with peers over that period from the current 8.5% gap down to 2.5. So the 4% we really need won't close the pay gap in 4 years, but it'll narrow it from 8.5%, which it is now, down to 2.5% gap. At the end of that 4 years, if we got that 4%, we'll still be 2.5% behind our peers. I'd argue strongly that to ensure the growth agenda brings growth in quality as well as quantity, we need to show that we're at least narrowing that pay gap to keep our strong teachers and researchers in Wisconsin classrooms and libraries and laboratories. We will also have to cover a $25 million lapse over this biennium, which will bring strain and pain, once again, across the system. We're working with each institution closely now to do that in ways that will not cause classes to be canceled, that will not delay student progress toward degrees, and that will have the minimum possible effect on student services and all our other vital functions. The chancellors and I are committed to doing it that way, but it's going to take a lot of hard work. It's going to cause some pain and strain no matter how we do it. We're also working closely with Chancellor Gao and his colleagues at UW-La Crosse and the governor's office and the legislature to ensure that the La Crosse campus is able to make its full contribution to the agenda. And Regent Smith has been involved in helping with this as well. And conversations are going well with legislative leadership with the governor's office on what La Crosse would like to do. And I anticipate that we'll be back at the December meeting of this board with a revised, innovative proposal from UW-La Crosse to let that campus move forward in its way as our other campuses are in theirs to build a bright future for Wisconsin. So in turning the floor over now to Associate Vice President Frida Harris to give us a more detailed look at the budget results, let me conclude by saying that this biennial budget, I think, allows us to take the first steps toward that bright future. And you can all, and you should all of you in this room, feel good that we're on our way based on your hard work and that of many allies in this budget session. So as we go forward, I'd urge us all to keep our pace brisk and our eyes on the prize of a Wisconsin that is confident, competent, and competitive in the 21st century. So with that, I will turn it over to our confident, competent, and competitive Associate Vice President, Frida Harris.
Thank you, President Bott. Today's presentation will provide information on ongoing costs, growth agenda initiatives, recruitment and retention funds, other initiatives, capital projects, funding for other agencies that are relevant to our mission, and statutory language items. During the budget process, we primarily focused on GPR funds. However, at this point, it's more relevant to focus on all funding for initiatives. So a table comparing the board's request to the final budget on GPR fee funds is included in your folder. And today, we'll compare the first act, the Board of Regents' request, and the last act, the final legislative budget, including vetoes, of the six-act play that makes up the budget process. It seems like many more, doesn't it? As you can see here, this is the first time since the 2001-03 biennial budget that the UW system has actually seen a larger increase in funding for new initiatives than the base reductions or lapses that were required. This biennium, the Board of Regents requested $198 million in GPR fee funds, and received $240 million. The increase above the request is due to cost to continue. The Board of Regents requested $146 million for cost to continue items. The final budget provides $196 million, funding all of the cost to continue items and adding in debt service and inflationary increases for utilities that DOA includes for every state agency. The board requested $36 million over 2 years for the growth agenda, excluding UW-La Crosse. The budget provides $29 million, which almost fully funds these initiatives on an ongoing basis, beginning in 2008-09. No positions were added in the budget for the growth agenda. The board, however, requested $4.4 million in tuition authority for the La Crosse initiative over 2 years. The final budget provides $901,400. Using a GPR fee split rather than using a tuition increase to fund the initiative for the first year only. The budget does not provide the requested increase of $2.6 million in the second year. The board requested and received $10 million biennially for recruitment and retention of high-demand faculty and research academic staff. This funding will be important, and it will be an important resource for our campuses to use as they seek to retain faculty and staff in high-demand areas. The Board of Regents requests for additional staff to support veterans and to staff the Wisconsin Covenant were not included in the final budget. However, the budget creates an Office of the Wisconsin Covenant in the Department of Administration and provides funding for veterans remissions through the Higher Educational Aids Board. As this slide shows, several initiatives were funded that were not part of the board's request, including islet transplantation, an initiative to expand medical practice in rural areas, and one-time funds to match gifts and grants for lung cancer research. Program revenue funding of $400,000 each was also provided for the State Lab of Hygiene and the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab. All of the system's program revenue initiatives were funded as requested. In addition, the board received funding from other sources to support the aquaculture facility and the Discovery Farms. The UW system is required to lapse $25 million over the next 2 years. The ability to lapse over a 2-year period provides much-needed flexibility to the system to protect students and instructional activities. On the capital budget side, the Board of Regents requested $218.3 million in general fund supported borrowing for major projects and received $208.6 million. The board recommended $119 million in gifts and grants to support major projects and was authorized to use $107.5. The difference is $11.5 million in gifts associated with the UW-Madison Memorial Union, which is advance enumerated in 2009-11. $441.7 million of program revenue supported borrowing was requested by the board, and $314.4 million was authorized in the budget. In addition, $28.5 million of other funds were authorized. The budget enumerates, as part of major projects, new academic facilities at UW-La Crosse, UW-Madison, UW-Oshkosh, UW-Parkside, and UW-Superior. The capital budget also includes academic building remodeling and renovation projects at UW-Green Bay, UW-Oshkosh, UW-Stevens Point, and UW-Stout, as recommended by the State Building Commission. Major projects funded by program revenue include union projects for UW-Eau Claire and UW-Madison. But the Madison Memorial Union project is advanced enumerated for 2009-11 and not in this biennium. Dorm projects at UW-Oshkosh, UW-Parkside, River Falls, and UW-Whitewater were also included. The UW-Madison Lakeshore Dorm was the only program revenue project recommended by the Building Commission that was not included in the budget. The UW system requested $125 million of general fund supported borrowing for its all-agency fund needs. $125 million was provided in the budget, but that funding has to cover all state agencies. This amount was reduced from the Building Commission's recommendation of $165 million. Funding for the WEG grant in the Higher Educational Aids Board is at the level proposed by the governor, with a significant increase to $50 million in 2007-08 and $55 million in 2008-09. The funding at this level has allowed grants to students to be released and taken off hold. Those grants were on hold during the process because we weren't sure of how much money it is, but getting this higher level has allowed the students to get the funding that they needed to continue with their education. Veterans remissions funding will be funded through the Higher Educational Aids Board at the level proposed by the governor, with a $5 million increase provided in 07-08, increasing to $6.6 million in 08-09. The total provided is less than the projected amount required for 07-08. Undergraduate application fees will increase $9, and graduate applications will increase $11, generating an additional $1.1 million annually to support ongoing programming and admission office functions. Other statutory language changes will require the Board of Regents to allocate $200,000 from its largest GPR appropriation for the establishment of the School of Public Health at UW-Milwaukee if the board approves the school. To allocate $25,000 for a short course to introduce Chinese citizens to the Wisconsin idea, to provide various reports on IT projects to the Board of Regents and the Joint Committee on Information Policy and Technology, to provide information on segregated fees for each institution on its website, including detailed information on organizations and activities for which applicable seg fees are expended, and to submit an annual report on the number of employees with limited, concurrent, and backup appointments. The budget includes the governor's recommendation to reduce the waiting period for new employees to receive health insurance from 6 months to 2. His recommendations for tuition remissions for certain undocumented persons and domestic partner insurance for state employees were not part of the final budget. Tuition caps were not included in the budget, and targeted base cuts were removed, including reductions to public radio and television and reductions to the law school. This budget was long and difficult, and oftentimes it appeared to be like riding a roller coaster. However, this budget will provide a strong foundation upon which to grow the UW system and the economy of the state of Wisconsin. To conclude, the UW system requested $198 million and received $240 million in new funding for the biennium. The higher amount results from the addition of debt service and inflationary increases for utilities that DOA includes in every state agency. So at this point, I'm available to answer any questions that you may have.
Regent Spector? After a brief preliminary comment saying I'm sure we're all very grateful that the law school was not cut. I wondered if you could go back to the slide on the School of Public Health, because I have a question about the phrasing of that. Less competition for us. Go back. What does it mean, allocate $200,000 for the school if approved by the board? So does that mean we're approving the school in its entirety before we could allocate $200,000, or is that $200,000 somehow more of a further planning and inquiry?
you have to decide first that you want to have a School of Public Health at UW-Milwaukee. Currently, my understanding of what you're doing at this point is exploring resources needed and receiving additional information. Once you do that, we will have to reallocate, which means we'll have to take money from somewhere else in our budget, $200,000 for the establishment of the School of Public Health.
So
If the board establishes.
If we didn't approve a School of Public Health, that $200,000 is just available for other purposes?
The $200,000 is being used for other purposes already. This is not additional money. You will have to take it from somewhere else and apply it to the School of Public Health.
So we still could take it from the law school.
That's the School of Banking. Larry, around this way. Regent Bartel.
Thank you. Question about the residential hall projects. If I understood correctly, the Lakeshore Dorm project in Madison, it was the only residential hall project that was deleted from the
Yes,
budget.
that is correct.
Is there a rationale for that?
I will let David Miller, or Assistant Vice President David Miller, address that question. There was certainly a lot of contention around the program revenue project centering around, in particular, the Res Hall projects.
Thank you. In addition to those 5, Frida, actually UW-Stevens Point is also in there, just so Stevens Point doesn't wonder where they work. With Madison, it was a long discussion with a lot of legislators before they finally decided not to enumerate this as a project. However, some legislators did seem open to the university and board coming back with a future recommendation. And so I think the next 2 months we'll be studying with the Division of Housing, UW-Madison, and the Building Commission members about a possible alternative method of delivering additional beds for freshman students. You may recall that UW-Madison is the only Big Ten school that does not offer enough housing for its freshman class currently. We're about 700 beds short. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, here. Danae?
To follow up on Regent Spector's question, Frida?
Yeah.
So what was the conversation around this $200,000 reallocation thing? I mean, who was arguing for it? What's the skinny?
We were not included in the discussions of that. It's something that appeared in the budget. So that's basically.
All righty then.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting question.
Right. Thank you.
And we weren't included in the $25,000 mandated allocation for short course for Chinese students.
Okay.
It just appeared.
Okay then. All right then. Thank you.
Just say thank you.
Thank you. Regent Loftus?
Yeah, two questions for President Riley, and then I hope Frida, we could maybe have a short discourse on where we ended up on veterans, and that I see we had a new paper today. But President Riley, on lacrosse, is it fair to say that the legislature said that if you're going to propose raising tuition to fund financial aid, that's a non-starter?
Yes, I think it's fair to say that was the message.
Yeah.
So the proposal that lacrosse will come back with, and Provost Colclaw here if he wants to comment, will not do that.
Yeah.
It will be revised in that regard.
So pretty much we can think in the near future at least that avenue is kind of closed to us.
Well, I guess the answer is yes. I think we need to keep thinking about that as part of our strategic planning and having the conversations. And I think come February or March, depending on where we come out with the Advantage Wisconsin process, we may want to go back and say, okay, we've rethought this. Here's how we're thinking about it. How do you? But I mean, I think we ought to be genuinely open-minded about that. We ought to at this point.
And then could you comment on sort of this written tongue lashing on IT?
Well, I think the people are still concerned about not only our IT issues, but those in a number of other state agencies. You keep reading about the attention to that, and I think this was a way to say we really want you to pay attention to how you manage this going forward. I think we are doing that. I think we can demonstrate that well to you with some of the new oversight that you'll have into the state going forward. But these are, let me not be Pollyannish. These are still very big, fraught projects, and it will be difficult to do it right. We will put all the controls in place to try to get there. But these will be big, tough issues, so the fact that we have to report on them is fine. We'll report on them and get whatever advice and monitoring along the way that people want to give us.
So the regents have to approve now each campus's IT plan?
I believe that's the way the language is written, Frida, is it not?
That is correct, but just following up on what President Riley said, there's similar language on this for the Department of Administration as well, related to these IT projects. So it was not just simply the university. It applies much more broadly than that.
Okay. And then on veterans, it appears to me, I could be wrong, that we have a shortfall greater than we anticipated, and what the legislature in essence said is to make up that shortfall, we would take it from other tuition revenues?
The legislature has not said how we have to manage the veterans' remissions shortfall. We have had shortfalls in veterans' remissions funds for the past 2 years. This is the first time that there is actual state funding associated with that. You could decide as a board that you wanted to increase tuition to do that. The board has not done that to this point. So the shortfall really is a shortfall in revenue to the institutions.
Do you have any comment on that, President Riley?
Well, our argument all along, I think, on the merits has been the right one, which is that the people who serve in our armed forces are not out there protecting students. They're out there protecting all Americans, and therefore Americans, in this case Wisconsinites in Wisconsin, all of us ought to be paying for the remission for their higher education. So I think we're not happy with that outcome. We are happy with the partial funding we received to cover some of the remissions. We think, though, that the moral argument that all those remissions ought to be covered through taxpayer dollars from all the taxpayers who are being defended by those folks when they're in the armed services is the right argument, and we'll continue to press that in the future.
Which, by the way, is also the argument that individual veterans have been making very strongly.
Regent Pruitt?
Not a question so much as a comment. I just wanted to especially acknowledge, and I think, Kevin, you did an outstanding job. I especially wanted to acknowledge the leadership of the chancellors on this budget process. You had a lot of people behind you in this in the fight, but leadership really does matter. And I have absolutely no doubt that we would not have achieved this outcome without the leadership of the chancellors. And I just wanted to formally acknowledge that. You folks did a remarkable job. Thank you. Here.
If I could add to that, Regent Pruitt, thanks especially to what is still our relatively new external relations and communications team headed by Dave Giroux and with Jess Tormey and Grant Huber, who are both here earlier but may not be now.
Send them back down to the rocks, guys.
Okay. Well, they did a terrific job in the course of this, and I want to recognize them.
Any other questions? Regent Walsh?
Question on the veterans. In 2006 to 7, as the new information in chart showed, it increased dramatically. Do we have any metrics to tell us what we might be looking at the next year?
There really isn't great metrics for figuring out what we would need for next year. We've got a significant increase from 2006-07 to 2007-08. The remissions have more than doubled, but that was primarily due to the change of the veterans benefits for veterans themselves from 50% to 100% remissions. Next year, the change should primarily be due to increases in population of the number of veterans who are taking advantage of those benefits and the tuition increases. Now, as more veterans return from war, we would expect that the numbers will probably increase, as well as, just people getting information about the fact that those remissions are available to them.
Well, we're going to be appearing, I think, next Tuesday or Wednesday before the Senate committee. We ought to have a pretty good idea, at least as to the factors that impact this, because it'll be too late to tell the story later. And I understand why it almost doubled, because they went from 50 to 100%, but there's lots of other factors, including getting the word out, more veterans back, our goal to grow the growth agenda, and all of these will cost us more money. And so next Wednesday, I hope we have some information for the
We will
testimony.
have an estimate of
Great.
what we think.
That'd be great.
Yes.
Regent Spector?
I just had a question, see if I understood correctly. We make recommendations as for new academic facilities or new dorms through the committee and the board. Then it goes to the building commission, goes to the Department of Administration, then the building commission, then the legislature can say no to that if they want to. Is that what I heard here? Well, I hope that in our strategic planning group that's dealing with efficiencies or whatever, there's some thought given to whether that's really in the best interest of the people of the state to waste that kind of time in quotes doing that. There must be some way to do this quicker, yet as effective.
It's a very good point, Regent Spector, and we will look at that. We have in the past, we have some ideas out there. I think we suffer less from lack of good ideas about how to fix the system than we do from will and advocacy to make those changes happen, and that's where we need to put our energy, I think.
Any other questions of Frida or Kevin or comments? If not, Chancellor Wells.
Well, we couldn't let this go by. I do want to make sure that we add our thanks and appreciation to the faculty and students and the staff on our campuses that have really worked hard. And I cannot tell you how much this budget has improved morale in the sense of importance that we always knew they had. That said, I know we got some challenges, but President Riley and colleagues, you just did a great job organizing all this, and the board, you guys have been fabulous. And I would like my campus colleagues, who are probably all tired sitting down now, to stand up and give you a round of applause.
Chancellor Wilson.
I come to these meetings, of course, as the chancellor of 13 campuses in the statewide UW Extension. And like Rick, I would be remiss if I did not uphold the role that those campus executive deans have played in this budget process. We called upon them. They made the local contacts. They spoke with the local legislators. They organized our students in those campuses. The 4 extension deans and directors were just absolutely superb. Rick Clemmy, Dean of Cooperative Extension, just did a superb job of organizing our 75 department heads across the state and getting those individuals to connect with legislators. And so I think I would be remiss if I did not really give credit, in this case, where credit is due, to those voices and those actions across this state who are not coming to these meetings, but who were very, very instrumental in helping us to marshal the message for the reinvestment in the UW. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Chancellor Wilson. Regent Davis.
Well, while we're in the thanking business, which I think is, a really good idea, I think we should thank our friends in the legislature who, carried the ball for us so consistently. I don't know who all they are, but I know there were some that we should also be on record as thanking. And I know we have. We've sent letters and all that kind of stuff. But since we're thanking, I think we should thank our friends in the legislature as well.
And I think you would also agree to be thanking a governor who got it, and a governor who went to bat for us, and a governor who insisted that we not be heard in this budget cycle. I'm sure you meant that too.
Absolutely. He goes to the top of my list.
May I have a motion to adjourn early?
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor, say aye. Aye. We stand adjourned. Thank you very much.